Hi folks, I'm Tim from memorywolf.com. I've tested over 60 memory cards in my Canon R5 Mark II to find out which cards perform best in camera and which cards don't work very well at all. Now, this is a pretty in-depth video, so if you prefer, you'll find a link to my test results and recommended cards in the pinned comment below this video. I'll also add new cards there as and when I have the opportunity to test them. So in this video, I'm going to cover which memory cards the R5 II supports, which memory cards not to buy because they don't work correctly in the R5 II or are simply just too slow, why choosing a card based on the fastest card label speeds isn't the best of ideas, the number of shots you can capture and buffer clearing times from all of the cards that I have tested so far, the speed difference between using a CFexpress Type B and a UHS-II SD card, recording to both a CFexpress and SD card at the same time, the number of images you can capture depending on the card capacity, when you actually need to use a CFexpress card for recording video, and finally my recommended cards and readers. Now, I could have covered my recommended cards first, but there's a lot of very important information you should really know before buying a card. But if you're not interested, just check that pinned comment or skip to the end of the video. So let's get started. So the R5 Mark II has two memory card slots. Slot 1 supports the faster CFexpress Type B cards and slot 2 supports SD cards. When buying CFexpress Type B cards, you might notice that there are currently two standards. The CFexpress 2.0 standard, which supports transfer speeds up to 2000 megabytes per second, and the newer 4.0 standard that supports up to 4000 megabytes per second. It's important to note, however, that although 4.0 cards will work in the R5 II because the standard is backwards compatible, the R5 II does not feature the Gen 4 hardware, so you can't take advantage of the faster 4.0 speeds in camera. If you're shooting video, then the VPG rating on the card guarantees a minimum write speed. A card with a VPG 400 rating is sufficient to cover all of the video modes that the R5 II supports. When it comes to SD cards, both the UHS-II and UHS-I standards are supported. UHS-II cards are faster with transfer speeds up to around 300 megabytes per second, whilst UHS-I cards support up to around 100, though some are being overclocked to faster speeds. SD cards also have a video rating that provides a minimum guaranteed write speed for recording video. This rating can also be used to help action shooters determine which cards will clear images from the buffer the fastest. So now, which memory cards do I recommend not to buy? Well, after testing over 60 cards in camera, I discovered there are some cards that perform very poorly in the R5 II. First is the ProGrade Digital 400GB CFexpress 4 Iridium card, which is their current premium Type B card. This card is very slow in the R5 II, clearing the buffer up to 3 times slower than I would expect. Interestingly, the first time you power on the R5 II and shoot a burst, it clears the buffer in the time that I would expect, but all of the following bursts are 2 to 3 times slower than they should be. If you were to fill the buffer shooting RAW and JPEG, it takes most cards around 10 seconds to clear it, but the ProGrade Iridium takes up to 30 seconds. It also performs like this in the R6 Mark III, but works just fine in my R5 Mark I, so it's a very camera model specific issue. I have contacted ProGrade about this, but so far I have not heard anything back. If I do hear anything, I will put an update in the pinned comment below this video. Fortunately, the firmware on ProGrade Iridium cards can be updated, providing you have a Refresh Pro enabled card reader from ProGrade. I'll drop a link to these readers in the pinned comment. The current firmware on my card is showing EFLU 92.2. If you already own this card, I'd be interested to know how it's performing in your R5 II. There are also some reviews on Amazon with people saying that it is very slow. Next, unfortunately, another ProGrade card. This time a 128GB CFexpress 2 Gold card. Now, there's nothing actually wrong with this card, it just has a very slow sustained write speed. The 1700 megabytes a second printed on the label is actually the maximum read speed. The sustained write speed is only 250 megabytes per second. This makes it slower than all of the V90 rated SD cards that I've tested and even a couple of the V60 cards. It's clearing the buffer in my test around 3 times slower than most CFexpress cards. If you don't shoot continuous bursts, this isn't going to be so much of an issue, but if you do, it will definitely slow down your shooting. I've not tested the 256GB version, but that has a sustained write speed of just a little faster at 300 megabytes per second, so it'll also be pretty slow in the R5 II. Once you get to the 512GB card, the sustained write speeds are a lot faster. Finally, the Pair Gear Master. Now, I haven't actually tested this card in the R5 II yet, and that's because despite ordering one in early December 25, it still hasn't arrived at the time of publishing this video. Pair Gear have blamed this on the current memory chip crisis, and they don't know when they expect to have more cards in stock. However, they don't mention their supply difficulties on their website. They just let you order regardless. So if you do order this card, you might be in for a long wait. If I do ever receive my card or need to request a refund, then I'll update this in the pinned comment. Next up, the SD cards not to buy. And the first one I'd recommend avoiding is the Angelbird 64GB AV Pro Mark II V90 SD card. I've tested 2 of these cards in 8 different R series cameras, and they are extremely slow in all cameras including the R5 II, writing around 3 times slower than I would expect. Yet the same cards work fine in other camera models. The 128GB version of this card works as it should. It's just the 64GB version that has an issue. I bought my cards back in 2023, so I decided to purchase a new card in December 25 to see if anything had changed, and it looks like it has, as the card I received has a different design on the back and is now working as I would expect. So you could take a risk with this card and hope you receive the updated version, but there is a chance you could still receive old stock. Next up, the Sony SFM V60 SD cards, both a tough and non-tough version. Both cards are writing very slowly in the R5 II, yet they work fine in other R series cameras that I have tested them in, so I'd recommend avoiding them as well. Next up, why choosing a card based on the fastest card label speeds isn't the best of ideas. First, as we've already discussed with the ProGrade Gold 128GB card, sometimes the speeds printed on the labels are actually the maximum read speeds, not the write speed. The read speed will not tell you anything about how the card will perform in camera. Secondly, if the write speeds are printed on the labels, then these are often the maximum write speeds and not the sustained speeds. Again, the max speeds won't help you to understand how they will perform in camera. Some cards are now starting to display the sustained write speeds on the labels, which is a lot more helpful. Finally, when shooting in RAW plus JPEG large, the R5 II is only writing to the card at an average speed of around 500 megabytes per second, and with other file types it's even slower. So there is no in-camera performance benefit to purchasing cards with a much faster sustained write speed than this, although I'd recommend a minimum of 600 megabytes per second for a small buffer, as these speeds are not always accurate in camera. So now let's look at the number of shots you can capture and buffer clearing times from all of the CFexpress Type B cards and the SD cards that I have tested so far. Please note that all of the data you will see here is based on my test conditions. If you test this yourself, then you'll most likely see slightly different figures because a different scene will generate different file sizes, but they shouldn't be too far off. So all of the CFexpress cards that you can see here were able to capture 88 shots and clear the buffer in around 9.5 seconds when shooting RAW plus JPEG L at 30 frames per second. I choose this setup because it pushes the memory cards harder than the other file type combinations. The same goes for these CFexpress cards, 88 shots in around 9.5 seconds. Now we have some slightly slower cards. The Angelbird 512GB Pro SE card is just fractionally slower, but nothing really to worry about. The Sony TUF 240GB card is a little slower still, as is the Sabrent Rocket 512GB, which has a sustained write speed of only 400 megabytes per second. And we already know the reason why the ProGrade cards are slow. So now onto the V90 SD cards. The Nextorage NX-B2 PRO 256GB and Sony TUF SFG 64GB were the fastest cards that I tested, capturing 85 images shooting RAW plus JPEG L and clearing the buffer in around 21 seconds. The next 15 V90 SD cards were not far behind. They also captured 85 shots before filling the buffer and cleared it in around 22 seconds. Finally, we have the V60 SD cards and a single V30. All of these cards captured 81 shots before filling the buffer, but clearing it ranged from 28 seconds all the way up to 74 seconds, so there is a much bigger difference in write performance between the V60 cards than there is with the V90 cards. I've also included the poor performing Angelbird 64GB card here, and also the poor performing Sony SFM cards that we discussed earlier. The 64GB Sony SFE card is the slowest card here. With a write speed of just 45 megabytes per second, it also carries a V30 video speed rating. But thanks to Sony, it's a little confusing because the 128GB version of this card is much faster, with a 100 megabyte per second write speed and a V60 rating for video. So watch out for that if you're looking at these cards. Next, a quick speed comparison between a CFexpress and an SD card, or to be precise, the Delkin Devices Power 160GB CFexpress card and the Delkin Power 64 V90 SD card, which are two of the fastest cards that I have tested in the R5 II. When shooting RAW at 30 frames per second, the R5 II captures 103 shots before filling the buffer and clears it in 7 seconds with the CFexpress card. The SD card captures 88 shots before filling the buffer and clears it in 16 seconds, so it's more than twice as fast. But when shooting C-RAW, it's a different story. The R5 II now captures 202 shots before filling the buffer and clears it in 13.5 seconds with the CFexpress card. The SD card also captures 202 shots before filling the buffer and clears it in 14 seconds, so there's barely any difference. It's the same for JPEGs. You can capture 211 shots and clear the buffer in 14 seconds, regardless of which card you are shooting to. Now, I know not everyone wants to shoot at 30 frames per second, so here are the figures for 15 frames per second and also 12 frames per second with a mechanical shutter. Just hit pause if you want to study these a little further. Just a note, I don't shoot over 300 shots with a mechanical shutter because this is not very camera friendly. This is also a 25-second burst anyway, which I don't imagine many people will be doing. Next, let's briefly talk about dual recording to both a CFexpress and an SD card. It's important to mention these options because your choice of cards here is very important. So you basically have 3 options when it comes to recording to both cards. You can either set up the R5 II to record to one card, then automatically switch to the second card when the first is full, or you can set it to record to multiple. This is when the same image type, such as RAW, is recorded to both memory card slots. However, the write speed will always be limited by the slowest card, so that's most likely the SD card that you choose for slot 2. So it makes little sense to purchase a fast CFexpress card, then cripple it by putting in the slowest possible SD card. The last option here is to record separately. So you could record RAW images to slot 1 and JPEG images to slot 2, or video to slot 1 and images to slot 2. If you're going to do this, then it's best to record the larger RAW files to the CFexpress card and the smaller JPEG files to the SD card. This setup will clear the buffer much faster than doing it the other way around. And now, the number of images you can capture depending on the card capacity. With memory prices on the rise, you might not want to purchase a larger, more expensive card than you really need to, but at the same time, you don't want to purchase one that's too small. So to help you decide on the size of card to go for, here are the approximate number of images you can store with the most popular capacities. You may want to hit pause to take these numbers in. So when do you actually need to use a CFexpress card for recording video? If you're shooting video, then there are some video modes that do require a CFexpress card, and hopefully I've covered all of them here. Many CFexpress cards can sustain 400 megabytes a second, but if you want to be sure, then go with a VPG 400 certified card. And finally, my recommended cards and readers. All of the CFexpress cards displayed here feature a sustained write speed of 600 megabytes a second or faster, so you'll see very little difference between them in camera when shooting images. I'd simply recommend basing your purchase decision on your preferred brand or the best price at the time of purchase. Now, if you record in very hot environments or are filling and formatting your cards on a daily basis, then you might want to go with a card that features PSLC NAND memory. PSLC based cards feature improved performance, durability and heat tolerance compared to 3D TLC NAND based cards, which most CFexpress cards are using. The only downside is the cost. PSLC cards are becoming very expensive in 2026 due to the demands of AI. Unfortunately, not all manufacturers state what type of memory they use in their cards, but I know that the Delkin Black series, the Nextorage B2 PRO series, Lexar Diamond series and the NovaChips Extreme series all use PSLC NAND memory. When it comes to V90 rated UHS-II cards, there is very little difference in performance between all of the cards displayed here. So again, I'd simply recommend basing your decision on your preferred brand or the best price at the time of purchase. For the V60 rated UHS-II SD cards, there is a big difference in the write performance. If you're shooting continuous bursts, then I'll personally be going with one of the faster cards like the Lexar Gold Armor or 1800X series. If you don't shoot bursts, then it's probably not going to matter too much which you pick. Finally, some recommended brands that you might not have heard about, because it's not only Lexar and SanDisk making memory cards these days. Delkin Devices might be one of the brands that you have heard about. They are a US company with US and UK based support teams. Their cards have excellent reliability and performance, and if they were to fail, then they also have one of the best warranties available, with a 48-hour replacement guarantee on their Black Series cards. Nextorage are a Japanese company founded by former memory card engineers from Sony. They have a very good selection of cards to choose from according to your budget, and they all perform really well in the R5 too. Novachips is a South Korean company, and their cards also perform very well in the R5 too, and they are also one of the best value cards on the market today. And last but not least is OWC, which stands for Otherworld Computing, another US company that produces really good memory cards that will not break the bank. As far as card readers are concerned, my recommendation is quite simple. If possible, stick with the same brand for both cards and readers. This minimises the risk of any compatibility issues. Now, it's important to note that the maximum transfer speed of a reader will also be limited by the card that you are using and the speed of the device that you connect the reader to. So if you put in a very slow card, don't expect to achieve the fastest speeds claimed by the reader. It's also important to note that most readers advertise their speeds in gigabits per second, so don't confuse this with gigabytes per second. 10 gigabits per second is around 1250 megabytes per second. Finally, it's important to note that right now memory prices are going in only one direction, and that's up. Some cards already cost more than double what they cost last year, and largely thanks to the demands of AI, it doesn't look like it's going to be changing anytime soon. So if you are looking to purchase, I'd recommend doing so sooner rather than later. So hopefully I haven't bored you to death and you found at least some of the video helpful. If you did, please do hit those like and subscribe buttons, and don't forget to check out my recommended cards and in-camera tests in the pinned comment below this video. Until next time, happy shooting.